The book of Job is pretty challenging for a lot of people because you see, of course, this kind of scene where the advocate, the Satan or this tempter comes up before God and kind of is like, hey, let me mess with Job and he's not going to worship you anymore. And God's like, well, all right. And then, the tempter has his way and Job's life is ruined and he loses his family and all that. And at the end, Job 48, God shows up and he's just like, some people, they see God and he's like, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? And it's almost as if God is like, shut up, I know what I'm doing. You're man and I'm God, and stop, complaining. I think we need to kind of rewind the script a little bit because the book of Job is wisdom literature. We often approach Job like it's intended to just explain why God allows suffering. It's telling us wisdom. That's what Job is about, and it uses suffering as a kind of launch pad to get us into that. Now, let me lay this out real quick. The argument between Job and his friends begins in chapter 3. 25 chapters later, it's like we haven't moved an inch. And you get this sense, I had an Old Testament professor, brilliant guy. He said, by the time you're halfway through the book of Job, you want to throw your Bible against the wall. And it's maddening, isn't it? And yet then you get to chapter 28, where this new question is asked, where can wisdom be found? Where does understanding dwell? And that's the question that we've been almost asking ourselves through this whole argument. And it answers the question. It says that God knows all these things. And then God comes up and he speaks to Job in chapter 48, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? It really is trying to show that God is the one who knows all these sorts of things and we don't. This would lead me to reconsider how we thought about the opening of Job. Because remember, it wasn't Satan who started this conversation, it was God. The reason that God is sort of egging on the tempter or the Satan to do this thing with Job, we don't have access to that. Now, when we get to the end of Job, even though there's so much we can't know about suffering, we do learn some things. We see that Job is reestablished with his family. Job also he prays for his friends. So he takes on this kind of priestly role as somebody who's gone through suffering himself. And when it comes to Job's family, this is really interesting because, God gives Job back his family and people are like, well, what the heck, I think we're looking at that question from the wrong side. Ellen Davis, who's a theologian, she pointed this out. She said, look, at the beginning of Job, we learn that Job had some daughters. We don't know their names. But then at the end of Job, it says that he has these daughters and we know their names now. And it says that they receive an equal inheritance among their own brothers, which is pretty unheard of. So the question is not whether God can resupply Job with all of his lost stuff, it's whether Job can become a father again. And what we see is that Job is actually a new man, forged in the fires that only suffering can produce.